she was trapped in the snow with a farmer, without imagining that he was a millionaire and that she would fall in love. The blizzard came down like a furious white curtain, swallowing the winding country road in minutes. Eleanor pressed her gloved hand against the fogged-up window of her rental car, willing herself to see even a flicker of movement beyond the storm. But there was nothing, no headlights, no houses, not even the faint shape of a fence. Just snow, whipping sideways and piling into drifts that had already swallowed her tires. She shivered, breath shallow, and wondered why she'd ever believed a GPS that promised a faster scenic route. Her phone displayed a dying battery and a single flickering bar of service. She tried to call for roadside assistance anyway, but the line crackled and then went dead. She felt the first edge of panic gnaw at her ribs. This was not how she'd planned her New Year's Eve, a solo trip to clear her head, a few days in a quaint little village, a resolution to finally forget everything she'd left behind in the city. Instead, she was stranded on a snow-choked backroad, darkness gathering, the temperature dropping by the minute. Then, out of the swirling white, a beam of light appeared. At first, she thought she must be imagining it, an illusion born of desperation. But no, it grew brighter, cutting a golden path through the snow. A figure emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, a thick wool coat dusted in white. He carried a lantern in one hand and trudged forward with an almost uncanny calm. He tapped on her window. "You'll freeze out here," he said, voice low and steady. "Come on. My place isn't far." Eleanor's instinct flared with caution. She didn't know this man. But the cold was already seeping through her coat, numbing her legs. And there was something reassuring in the way he waited, patient, not pressing her. She cracked the door open. Snow blew in instantly, biting her skin. He offered his hand. It was rough and warm, and she took it. She didn't realize she was shaking until he wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders and led her away from the car. The wind howled at their backs. She stumbled twice, and each time he caught her without a word. 100 questions crowded her mind. Who was he? Why was he out here in the storm? But the cold made it impossible to think straight. After what felt like an hour, the snow parted to reveal a rambling farmhouse. Warm light glowed in every window. He guided her up the porch steps and opened the heavy oak door. Instantly, heat wrapped around her like an embrace. The scent of wood smoke and something rich, stew or roast, rose to meet her. He helped her out of her wet coat and set her boots by the fire. "Sit here. I'll bring you something hot." She sank into an overstuffed armchair, legs trembling. The man disappeared into what must have been the kitchen. She studied the room through the haze of exhaustion. It was old but impeccably kept, with polished oak beams and bookshelves lined with volumes that looked antique. A grandfather clock ticked in the corner. The mantel was decorated with photographs, landscapes, animals, a few portraits of people she didn't recognize. He returned with a steaming mug. "Chamomile and honey," he said. "You look like you could use it." "Thank you," she managed, voice cracking. She took the cup and wrapped her hands around it, savoring the heat. "My name's Daniel." He pulled up a chair across from her, resting his arms on his knees. Snow came down faster than they forecasted. "They've closed the main roads, so you'll have to stay here tonight." I don't want to impose," Eleanor stammered. "You're not. This house has seen 100 storms worse than this. It's sturdy enough for both of us." He studied her face with those level gray eyes. "You're safe here." The simplicity of it calmed her. She nodded, sipping her tea. When she finally looked at him properly, she realized he was younger than she'd first assumed. Maybe mid-30s, with dark hair that fell into his eyes when he leaned forward. His jaw was shadowed with stubble, and he moved with a quiet self-assurance that made the storm seem almost irrelevant. "Do you live here alone?" she asked, her voice softer. Daniel hesitated just a fraction before answering. "Mostly. My family's old farm. I kept it running." Something in the way he said it made her wonder if there was more to the story, but she didn't press him. Hours passed, and the storm only grew wilder, battering the windows and piling drifts against the porch. Daniel cooked a simple dinner, vegetable stew and fresh bread, and they ate at a wide pine table near the fire. She learned he had grown up in this house, left for a time, then come back after his father died. He didn't mention why he'd returned for good. She told him about her life in the city, her job as an art curator, the apartment she'd loved and then sold when it felt too full of memories she couldn't bear. She didn't know when the conversation had stopped being polite and become something warmer, deeper. His voice was low and steady, like the crackling logs in the hearth. She caught herself laughing once, and it felt unfamiliar, a relief she hadn't expected. Later, while she stood at the window, watching the snow swirl beneath the porch lantern, Daniel came to stand beside her. "It'll let up by morning," he murmured. "You're not worried?" she asked. He smiled faintly. Worry never changed the weather. It was only when she turned to look at him that she realized how close they were standing. For a moment, the storm vanished, the world shrinking to the hush of the warm kitchen, the soft gleam in his eyes. Her heart stumbled in her chest. She took a careful step back, cheeks warm. "Thank you for helping me." "You'd have done the same," he said simply. She wasn't sure she would have. Not everyone was so generous to strangers. Night came fully then, the house growing quiet except for the creaks of old timbers and the rising wind. Daniel showed her to a guest room that smelled of cedar. The quilt on the bed was hand-stitched, a constellation of indigo stars. She lay awake long after he'd gone, listening to the blizzard hammer the walls. She felt oddly safe, though she had never been more isolated. In the dark, she thought of his hands, how they'd felt when he helped her from the car. Strong, warm, unexpectedly gentle. She tried to remind herself she didn't know him, that he was just a farmer in the middle of nowhere. But something about him didn't fit the image. The house, too, felt incongruous, too well appointed, too carefully preserved. She wondered about the photographs she'd glimpsed on the mantel, the glimpses of an earlier life he hadn't spoken about. When she finally slept, it was a deep, dreamless slumber. She woke to pale dawn light streaming through the frost-laced window. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she heard the quiet sounds of someone moving downstairs, the kettle on the stove, the floorboards creaking. And she remembered everything. Eleanor dressed quickly, folding the borrowed flannel pajamas Daniel had left out for her. She felt a strange reluctance to leave the little room, but she forced herself to open the door. He was standing by the stove, stirring something in a pot. Sunlight fell across him, outlining the breadth of his shoulders. He looked up and gave her a slow, easy smile. "Morning," he said. "Hope you slept all right." She nodded, trying to ignore the way her heart fluttered. "The roads, are they clear?" "Not yet," he said. "I called the county plow service. They said it'll be a few hours." "You have a landline," she blurted, surprised. His mouth curved, as if he'd caught her curiosity. "I do. And a satellite internet connection. This place might look old, but it's not quite as rustic as it seems." Before she could ask, the kettle whistled. He poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. His eyes met hers, steady, almost searching. And she realized that she didn't know the first real thing about the man who'd saved her life. He seemed to sense her questions but didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he poured his own coffee and leaned back against the counter, studying her with that calm, watchful expression. She felt a flicker of self-consciousness under his gaze and looked down into the dark swirl of her cup, gathering the courage to ask what she couldn't ignore any longer. "You said you keep the farm running," she began carefully, "but this house doesn't feel like a farm." "It feels like something else," he offered, one eyebrow lifting. "Yes," she admitted, feeling her cheeks warm. "More like a retreat. Or maybe an old estate." He didn't answer at first. A log shifted in the stove, sending a burst of orange sparks behind the grate. He stared past her, as if weighing how much of the truth he was willing to share. "My father bought this property when he was young," he said finally, voice low. "It was nearly derelict then. Everyone thought he was out of his mind. But he was, let's say, successful in other ventures. He restored it slowly. After he died, I came back." "Other ventures," she echoed, studying the way his jaw tightened. Daniel hesitated, then looked her squarely in the eye. He owned one of the largest renewable energy companies in the state. When he passed, the estate came to me. Eleanor's fingers went still on her mug. 100 little details, how polished the floors were, the subtle artwork on the walls, the hidden satellite connection, fell into place with sudden clarity. He hadn't just been a farmer braving the snow. He was a man accustomed to a different kind of life, and perhaps choosing this simpler existence out of something deeper than nostalgia. "That explains a lot," she murmured. He lifted a shoulder in a faint shrug. "I don't talk about it much. Most people have assumptions when they hear the word millionaire. They stop seeing the person standing in front of them." Her throat tightened. She couldn't help wondering what he saw when he looked at her, a stranded stranger, a curiosity, or something else he hadn't decided yet. "You could have left," she said softly. "Sold this place and moved anywhere." "I could have," he agreed, studying her face. "But there's something about this land. When you spend enough time here, you realize you don't need so much else." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The quiet pressed in around them, heavy but not uncomfortable. She thought she could hear her own heartbeat in the hush. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Walking away from everything you built before?" His gaze turned inward, as though he were remembering a time when his life had been crowded with boardrooms and conference calls instead of winter fields. "No," he said after a long pause. "But it changes you. You stop pretending to be someone you're not. Maybe that's why I didn't leave you out there. I know what it's like to be lost." The honesty in his voice left her unsteady. She set her cup down before she spilled it. "I should check on my car," she said, needing a reason to look away. He didn't try to stop her, only followed her to the front door and helped her into her coat. The snow had stopped, but drifts still rose up to the porch railing, glittering under the pale morning sun. She squinted against the brightness and stepped carefully into the churned path they'd made the night before. Her rental car was half buried. She scraped snow from the windshield with a gloved hand, testing the door. It was frozen shut. Daniel appeared at her side with a small shovel and began methodically clearing the wheels. She tried to help, but he held up a hand. "Stay back. Your shoes aren't warm enough. I'll get it uncovered." "But you've already done so much." "You're not driving out of here until the plows come through anyway," he reminded her gently. She stood aside, helpless to do more than watch him work. He moved with quiet determination, every motion sure and economical. She wondered how many times he'd done this for neighbors or strangers stranded on the backroads. Somehow, it made her heart ache in a way she couldn't quite name. When the car was finally cleared enough that she could open the driver's door, she tried the ignition. The engine coughed weakly but didn't start. Daniel bent over and examined the battery with a practiced eye. "Frozen solid," he concluded. "You'll need a jump." She looked around the empty road. "From someone passing by?" He met her gaze steadily. "No one's coming for a few hours. But I have a battery pack." It struck her then how utterly dependent she was on this stranger, on his tools, his generosity, his calm refusal to let her panic. She swallowed and nodded, too aware of the strange tingling warmth spreading in her chest every time he looked at her. Back inside, he laid the battery pack by the door and set about refilling the stove. She tried to busy herself tidying the guest room, folding the quilt with shaking hands, telling herself she was only flustered because of the circumstances. But when she went back to the kitchen, she found him watching her again, expression thoughtful. "You don't have to feel guilty," he said quietly. "About what?" "About staying here." His eyes didn't waver. "About needing help. This house was always meant to shelter people who needed it." She sank into the chair by the fire, hugging her arms around herself. "It's strange," she confessed. "I thought I'd feel embarrassed. But I don't. Not here." "I'm glad," he said simply. The clock ticked on. Outside, a distant engine growled, the plow at last. She stood, heart hammering. Soon she'd be able to leave, drive away, pretend this night had been nothing but a brief inconvenience. But some part of her already knew she wouldn't. Daniel stepped closer, and she caught the faint scent of cedar and snow in his coat. "When the road clears, I'll help you get the car started," he said. "And then," she whispered before she could stop herself. His eyes searched hers, as though he were trying to decide whether to say what he was thinking. "Then, you'll go wherever you were going." Her throat went dry. She wanted to ask if he wanted her to stay, but she didn't dare. Instead, she turned to look out the window, where the snowplow crawled past like an ungainly metal beetle. The world beyond the farmhouse felt too bright, too ordinary, as though it couldn't possibly contain the same quiet magic that had bloomed in this kitchen overnight. Daniel didn't touch her, but she felt the nearness of him like a pulse beneath her skin. "You'll be able to leave within the hour," he said gently. Eleanor forced herself to nod. But her hands wouldn't stop trembling. The snowplow retreated into the distance, leaving the road passable in its wake. Eleanor watched its taillights fade behind a curtain of drifting powder. Each inch of cleared asphalt felt like an invisible cord tightening around her ribs, pulling her back to the world she thought she'd wanted to return to, her curated apartment in the city, her schedule full of openings and meetings and long nights staring into a glass of wine. She had come here to forget the ache of the past, but she had never expected to discover something she could no longer bear to lose. Daniel hadn't moved away from her side. His presence was a quiet, reassuring gravity, and she felt herself leaning toward it even as her mind insisted she should be making plans to leave. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, a stark contrast to the cold pressing at the windows. She turned to face him, heart thumping so loudly she wondered if he could hear it. "You said this house was meant to shelter people," she whispered, her breath trembling in the cold morning air that drifted through the door. "But what happens when they don't want to leave?" His eyes darkened, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw something uncertain flicker there, something vulnerable. He swallowed, his jaw tightening as though bracing for her to say something she hadn't yet found the courage to confess. "You don't have to go back if you don't want to," he said carefully. "I know we barely know each other, and maybe this is nothing more than the strangeness of being snowed in together. But," he hesitated, voice dropping, "I haven't felt like this in a long time." Her chest constricted with something she hadn't dared to name, hope, fragile and brilliant as dawn. The wind rattled the eaves, but inside, everything felt suspended in a stillness so profound she was almost afraid to speak. "When I came here," she said, "I thought I was running away from my life. I thought I needed to be alone. And maybe I did. But last night, this house—" she closed her eyes, steadying her breath. "I don't remember the last time I felt safe." "You are safe," he said, with a quiet conviction that left no space for doubt. She opened her eyes. His face was so close that she could see the faint lines bracketing his mouth, the flecks of winter gold in his gray irises. Everything she had left behind in the city felt suddenly irrelevant, just echoes of an old life she had outgrown. "Then maybe," she whispered, "I don't want to go back." "Not yet." For one charged instant, neither of them moved. Then Daniel reached up, brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, and she felt the last of her hesitation melt away. There was no logic left, no carefully reasoned argument for what she should do. There was only the truth, stark and undeniable, that something had shifted between them in the darkness of the storm, something she could no longer pretend to ignore. "I don't want you to go," he said simply. She drew in a shuddering breath. "Then ask me to stay." His hand dropped to her shoulder, warm and steady. He didn't look away, didn't pretend he was offering anything less than everything he was. "Stay." The word fell between them, heavier than the snowdrifts, brighter than the thin morning light. A single syllable that unraveled all the walls she'd built around herself. She felt the sting of tears behind her eyes, but this time they weren't born of grief or regret. She exhaled shakily, feeling something loosen in her chest. The fear, the loneliness, the constant ache of not belonging anywhere, all of it seemed to dissolve as she searched his face. She knew it would be complicated. She knew the world would have opinions about a woman who disappeared into the countryside and fell for a man she'd only known for a single night. But none of that mattered. What mattered was that for the first time in years, she felt like she had stepped into the life she was meant to find. She set her hand over his heart. Beneath her palm, it beat steady and sure. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "We don't have to decide everything now," he said. "You can stay as long as you want. A day. A week. Forever." She let out a shaky laugh, her vision blurring as the tears finally fell. He caught them with his thumb, brushing them away with an impossible tenderness. "Forever's a long time," she whispered. His mouth curved in the faintest, most devastating smile. "We'll start with breakfast." The simplest offer in the world, and somehow it felt like the most sacred. She nodded, unable to speak past the emotion crowding her throat. He took her hand, weaving his fingers between hers, and guided her back to the kitchen. The fire crackled softly, filling the space with the scent of pine and warmth. In the golden light, the farmhouse no longer felt like a refuge she'd stumbled into by accident. It felt like a place she could learn to belong, one day at a time. While Daniel poured fresh coffee and pulled eggs and bread from a cupboard, Eleanor stood by the window. Outside, the world glittered with untouched snowdrifts and new beginnings. The road was clear now, waiting for her decision, but she felt no urgency to test it. In her pocket, her phone buzzed to life at last, a message from her assistant in the city, a reminder of a meeting she'd planned to attend this afternoon. She read it twice, feeling the words dissolve into irrelevance. For so long, she had let her life be dictated by obligations she no longer cared about. Here, with this man who refused to pretend to be anything but exactly who he was, she saw the possibility of something real, something honest. Daniel turned to her with that same unhurried steadiness. "You're quiet," he said. "I was just thinking," she said softly. "Maybe getting lost wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to me." "Maybe," he agreed, his eyes meeting hers with a calm certainty that made her knees go weak. "Sometimes the road that feels like the end of everything is just the start." She felt a smile unfurl across her face, slow, incredulous, unstoppable. The kind of smile she hadn't worn in years. She set her phone face down on the counter, feeling a strange, beautiful relief in that simple act of surrender. "I'd like to stay," she said, her voice low but sure. His answering smile was quiet and luminous, the promise of 1,000 unspoken possibilities. "Then stay," he murmured, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And just like that, the woman who thought she needed to escape everything she'd ever known discovered that the place she'd been searching for all along wasn't on any map, wasn't in any plan. It was right here, in a farmhouse at the edge of a snow-covered road, in the steady hands of a man who had given her the courage to begin again.